Our next poet is a person that I only came to know when I first moved to Tempe, Arizona. I used to live in here in Tucson. Well, this is kind of near Tucson, and he wasn't in Tucson at the time, but later on, Bill Wetzel came, and he was a very good sign for poetry, you know, in Tucson, because he started the Tucson Indigenous reading series in the city, and some of you may have heard some of the readers. I was one of the readers back some time ago, and others. Bill Wetzel is, I won't say his indigenous name because I don't speak the language, so I'll say it in English. Blackfeet from Montana. He is a former bull rider and combat sports athlete turned writer and comedian, whose primary genre as a writer is micro-creative nonfiction. Author of The Acorn Gathering, a short story collection, Bill's work has appeared in American Indian Culture and Research Journal, Cutthroat, a Journal of the Arts, Yellow Medicine Review. Here's another difficult word, it's in Spanish. Hinchas de Poesia, and then Red Ink magazine, and other publications. And like I said, he co-founded the Indigenous reading series called Tucson Indigenous Reading Series. So please, let's welcome Bill Wetzel.
Thank you, everybody. I am humbled to be here. And of course, I am one of the all-time greats at being humble. First, let's give Laura and Simon a hand again. It's very difficult to read with genius, and I don't know how they read with me, you know. I'm pretty hard to follow and hard to read before, I know. The word he was trying to say earlier is Skapi Pakani, and it just means I'm a Blackfeet from Montana. And obviously the Blackfeet are a tall, dark, noble, stoic people. Micro-creative nonfiction is actually Twitter. And I'm known for such genius tweets as I say potato and you say it like a douche. I have a lot in common with the late great Nelson Mandela, mostly that we've both been to jail before. My body is not my temple. It's more like a really awesome whorehouse. Simon told me I can't cuss, so my reading's only going to be 2 minutes today. Now I'm going to read a short story I wrote, and this is for my brother Tim. My youngest brother recently passed away in May, and I started this story and kind of based on him before he passed away. Then afterwards, I finally decided to finish it, and this is called Jarash. These were the days of wandering. He was pale and thin, ghost-like, his tan jacket old and worn. Reverend watched inquisitively from the other side of the fire, head cocked to his left side, eyes crimson and half mad from hunger. The boy clinked a small pan and tin cup while pulling them from his bag. The camp was cool, brisk. His lungs ached with every breath of crisp air. He carefully laid thin strips of fresh brook trout into the pan, then held it over the fire. Reverend tilted his head over to the right, eyes fixated on the sizzling fish, mesmerized and eager. Come evening, he rested on his bedroll, smoking rolled tobacco and tippling whiskey from a flask. The fire crackled, casting oblique shadows in the declining light, shaded fragments rising over the ridge between the cut bank and arching in the wind over a dry spring bed. 30 feet below, his camp the creek babbled, soft and lulling. He was already nodding in and out of slumber when Reverend's whine alerted him to another presence. Out of the cascading darkness came a wordless, solitary figure, short and stout. He made out the silhouette from a scant distance, looming progressively larger with each forward step. Reverend tensed at his side. For a moment the boy was rendered mute, circumscribed by fear, his words clutched by an unseen force that chilled him. He knew there were demons out there who lived for destruction, not that they cared about destroying something, more like they never cared at all. They would annihilate anything and anyone. They were just as likely to devastate themselves. He had met them before, fought them, lived with them, prayed with them. These forces of extermination intermittently haunted him, possessing him into desolation. He knew there were many. "Who are you?" called the boy. I saw your fire," the figure answered. "The smoke." She came closer, an ancient Indian woman, impelling towards a campsite and stopping next to the fire. She carried slabs of dried meat in one hand and clutched a rifle in the other. Her clothes were filthy and ragged and her grin toothless. She offered the meat and the boy accepted without a word. "What is your name, my boy?" she asked. "Thank you," he said, evading the question. "There are clouds. I can feel the rain coming. If not tonight, it will come in the morning. Come stay." "I'm okay." "Come stay, there's a storm." "Where?" he asked. She pointed above the incline, further up the ridge from where the boy's campsite was struck. There was an old smokehouse abandoned for decades next to a mine shaft. She was pointing in this general direction when she suddenly started up the incline. The boy quickly gathered his belongings, following quietly behind her with Reverend. It was completely dark now, moonless. The night was placid, soundless. His neck bristled. The old woman shuffled through the murk, navigating a lightly worn path right up to the mouth of the mine shaft. Just inside, a deerskin hung as a makeshift door. They passed inward and made their way to a cleared area with a small wood stove and several piles of hides spread across a dirt floor. The primary lighting was a single oil lamp, along with a nominal faint glow emanating from inside the burning stove. Slabs of dried meat were suspended from the ceiling, cloaked and tranquil, and for an agitated moment, the boy mistook them for bats hanging from rafters. He hesitated with his bedroll, unsure of where to place it, when she gestured with a nod towards an empty corner. Already she was dishing up an unknown soup simmering on the stove into a cup-sized bowl for him. He ate cautiously, surprised by the sweet broth. "What is it?" "Sarvice berry soup." "Where did you get the berries?" She gave no answer, tossing several meaty bones to Reverend, who regarded them warily before eating. "Your dog looks like a priest. He has a collar." "Yeah, his name is Reverend. How long have you been here?" "What is your name?" she asked again. Neither answered. The old woman served herself a bowl of soup. All three ate in silence. The darkness enveloped them. The night an eerie, curious voyeur. She ate greedily. The boy rested on his bedroll. Reverend dozed off at his side, head lolling on the boy's right arm. The old woman poked a stick in the stove, shaking her head at the dying flames. She turned and rummaged in the shadowed corner of the room, moving back into sight with an armful of kindling. She walked back into the shadows again, emerging again, this time with 3 sizable logs. The boy was astounded at her strength. "Would you mind the fire, my boy?" she asked. This time he answered her. "Yes," he said. "I can look after it all night. You go ahead and rest." The boy walked over to the stove and added a kindling and a log. The wind was dry. The wood was dry, immediately catching fire. The flames danced, and the boy watched them transfixed. "Where are you from?" Again he answered her. "Just up the road, on the flats. I grew up there on my parents' place. Save for some time in the desert, it has always been my home." He laid back down on his bedroll. Reverend stirred but stayed in slumber. The boy was tired. The soup and the fire and his travels catching up to him. The old woman spoke again. "Our home is hard country, but good country. Some call it God's country, but I don't know if I see that here." This caught his attention. The boy looked at her and thought hard for a minute before speaking. "We live in the aftermath of manifestation," he answered. "God has everything to do with it, good or bad. We are surrounded by a country of great beauty and great sorrow. They have the same creator. You can't choose an association with one or the other. Both beauty and sorrow are children of the same Father, as are good and evil creations of the same God. And you know this how, my boy? Let me show you something." The boy rummaged in his belongings, pulling out a small sealed plastic bag. He walked over and handed it to her. Inside was something malleable, shriveled and black. "What is it?" "A man's ear." He thought she might recoil. Instead, the old woman nodded at him and handed it back. He continued, "In the desert there was a woman. This man used to sell her to others. I saw this day after day. Nobody did anything about it. Then one day I followed him after dark. When we got to a place near a dry riverbed where nobody could see, I confronted him. In the ensuing fight, I pulled on his right ear and ripped most of it off. This took the fight out of him. I left him with his life on the condition I never see him out selling that woman again." "And you kept his ear?" "Yes." "But why?" "At first I just panicked and brought it with me. Later it became a symbol to me." "Of what?" "Of beauty and sorrow. I know I am just a kid. However, I was born into a world of violence. It is one of the few things I know and do well. I am familiar with it. I am a violent person, and this was a violent action. But in that moment, misguided or not, I was a sentinel. In that violence, I set another person free. The method is sorrowful, but in its way, the altruism is beautiful. I have my demons. I battle them every day, but I have never hurt anybody who didn't deserve it. In fact, I mostly hurt myself, but I do have good in me." "Why are you out here then?" "I don't know." "Are you lost?" "I don't know." The old woman rocked forward and backward, then she spoke. "This world is isolating. What you feel is nothing exceptional or new. You have good in you, but there is something else. It is holding you back. The one thing I have learned in life is that we all have demons. You just can't let them defeat you. Whatever you have inside of you that is keeping you out here alone, living in squalor, you need to cast that aside and move on. But you live out here too. Who are you to tell me to do something different? I am an old woman with little life to live. My demons are long gone. You are a young boy who has given up on a life not even lived yet. You will fight everything else, yet you won't fight it yourself. That's the difference." For hours the boy minded the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. The wind moaned into the stovepipe and he grew weary. Nodding off, he fought sleep for some time. Then there was nothing. He awoke startled in the night at a presence hovering over him, the smell of sweet smoke in his nostrils, Reverend's shrill yelping painful in his ears. It was the old woman waving something. He couldn't make out what she was saying. He tried to protest, but tranquility came over him. Reverend whined and then stopped barking. He never felt more exhausted in his life. He fell back and slept again. The next morning, he awoke at dawn. Reverend was agitated, anxious. The old woman was gone. He went outside and searched the immediate area. She was nowhere to be found. He thought little of this, presuming this was her routine to leave early and come back later. By mid-morning, he was ready to move on. He had made up his mind to go back to his parents' home again, his home. He walked down the ridge, down the incline to his former campsite. The boy figured he'd follow the river for a spell, wash up, then walk back to the main dirt road before going home. He walked the narrow path down the cut bank to the water. The river was high and fast for this time of year, which still gave him no pause. He has never lived with that type of fear. What was last night a babbling creek seems today a fury of raging water. He must have slept through the storm. He doesn't recall it, nor did it seem particularly muddy walking down from the old woman's place. It must have hit hard further up, he thought. The heavy rains now washing down, bloating the normal docile waters in this section of the river. For him, the water was cleansing, crisp and cool as last night's air. He has never felt this revitalized. Whatever had been burdening him wasn't there anymore. He saw a color to his skin and felt a resolve in his bones that had not been there the night before. Reverend's mind cut him from his thoughts. The dog was nosing around something in a patch of weeds near the water's edge. As the boy got closer, he recognized the figure. A faint silhouette, short and stout. His heart sank when he realized it was the old Indian woman, drowned, caked in mud, swollen with water, half beached in the weeds and rock, her legs dangling in the rushing water. The boy figured she must have went to wash in the pre-dawn hours. She hadn't realized the waters had risen from the storm, and she fell in and drowned. This was plausible to him, and he hoped it was that painless and easy. He tried not to think of death as he dug a shallow grave for her in the soft earth near the mine shaft where she lived. He said a prayer as he fashioned thin rope and her kindling into a makeshift cross. By noon, he and Reverend were on the road again, two lonely figures walking home under an expansive sky in a flat and picturesque landscape. Thank you.